Hey, what's up, everybody? It's Model Aviation Live with Jay Smith, but I'm not Jay Smith. I'm Matt Ruddick. You guys might know me from AMA Air and the AMA podcast. I'm filling in for Jay for just a little bit. He's having some technical issues on his end. Hopefully, he's going to be able to join us back here on the show here in just a few minutes. In the meantime, I thought I'd jump in here and maybe get the show started a little bit. I know you guys have all been waiting. We started a little late again because of technical issues, but hey, we're here now. I hope you guys are having a wonderful Friday and ready for the weekend. I know I'm ready for the weekend. But this is Model Aviation Live. I want to tell you a little bit about what we have coming up today. We've got Pat Tritle. He is a contributor for Model Aviation Magazine. He's going to be joining us today to talk a little bit about himself and some of the things he has going on. But we also wanted to let you guys know that if you're a digital subscriber to Model Aviation Magazine, you should already be able to see the digital edition of the April issue. And we've got the cover right here. The cover story is about the Toledo show. Of course, the Toledo show, unfortunately, we've said goodbye to that over the past year. We've got a really amazing article in this month's Model Aviation talking about the Toledo show, the history of it. And look at that gorgeous photo on the cover, too, because you guys know me. I'm a huge photography fan. I love great photographs, and that photograph on the cover of Model Aviation for the month of April is just beautiful. It's taken, I believe, from the 1981 Toledo show. So just an amazing photograph. I hope you guys get to check out that issue. Again, that's the April issue. If you're a digital subscriber, you already have access to it. They should be hitting your mailboxes here within the next week or two. And I hope you guys enjoy what we have to share with you from that issue. We've got some really cool reviews in there as well. We've got a review on the New Spectrum radio. There's a jet review in there as well. So be sure you check that out as it comes to your mailbox. Or again, if you're a digital subscriber, you can get it now. Let's jump right into our interview, though, if you guys don't mind. So today, we've decided to bring on Pat Tritle. He is one of our Model Aviation contributors. Pat, thank you so much for joining us today on Model Aviation Live.
Well, thank you. I appreciate you having me on.
Absolutely. So tell me, Pat, let's for folks that don't know much about you, I'd love for you to kind of give us a little background in your history in modeling and what you do for Model Aviation Magazine.
Well, I've been modeling since I was about 5 years old, and I've had more darn fun with this in modeling just virtually anything that I can get my hands on. And, between free flight, plastic, U-control, RC, I've done a little of all of it over the years, and there's nothing that I can think of that I would like to do any more than that. But, yeah, it's kind of a lifelong passion, and I don't see it going away anytime soon.
You and I had a good conversation before the show started about how important modeling was to, the aviation industry, and of course some of the fun kind of escapades that you've had and that I've had in not just model aviation, but in aviation in general. Tell us a little bit about what you do for the magazine. I know you write a column in the magazine. Is that right?
Yes, I've been doing the small field flying column now for two and a half years, give or take. And I have absolutely enjoyed all of the people that I've met because of that, and all the friends that I've made in modeling over the years because of the column and other things, and a couple of construction articles along the way and a how-to here and there, and just anything modeling related is just terrific stuff.
So, what do you consider a topic small field flying? What would you consider a small field flying topic to be like?
Well, it's in the modeling realm. It's anything that can be flown in a soccer field, or I've flown on baseball diamonds, and a lot of the models that I've done have actually crossed over between any small field venue and actually full size flying fields. If it's suitable for a small park, it can cross over into, as it were, club fields also.
Absolutely. We actually have somebody in the chat that his name is Douglas Allen, said Pat and I did free flight in North Albuquerque with his son Steven back in the early 80s. So hello to you, Douglas. Thanks for tuning in and leaving that comment for us.
Well, I've known Doug for years. Doug's a great guy, and his son, I got to tell you, it's a kind of an iconic story here. He and I decided many, many years ago that we were going to do a free flight contest, just he and I. And the goal was that we laid out a 24-inch box, and as long as the model fit inside that 24-inch box, it was high wing and a cabin airplane, anything goes. So I designed an airplane called a Vertigo, and it's ultimately been kitted by Dare, who's now Brodak. And the goal was to see who could make their airplane fly the longest. Well, I ended up building 4 of those things because the first 3 flew away, all of them within 3 flights. And so I didn't pursue it. If you can't hang on to one, how are you ever going to get it trimmed? So yeah, it's an interesting thing, but Doug has been a friend for many, many years, and I meet up with him every year or so over in Tucson. So we do have a good time.
I'm actually trying to track down. I hope that I found the right one, but I'm looking for that airplane you were talking about, the Vertigo. Have I found the right one?
Yep, that's the one.
So there you go, guys. That is the Vertigo. And you said you actually designed that airplane, right?
Yes, I did. Yeah.
Very cool. How about that? I'm on top of things, running the show from behind the scenes and in front of the camera. How about that? Well, that's awesome. So what sort of things do you like to fly these days?
Well, I've always been a scale type. The scale is my front line in either free flight or RC. And civilian 2-seaters have always been at the front line of my obvious choice in, what to build and fly. But yeah, it's my best day at the flying field. If I can get out and shoot 30 or 40 landings, I'm a happy guy.
Yeah. So let me ask you this. So there's been a little bit of a resurgence in popularity in building aircraft over the past year, especially with the pandemic kind of keeping a lot of us indoors and not letting us get out as much as we'd like to. There's a lot of building that's been going on. What kind of advice do you have for folks that maybe they're looking to get into building their first aircraft, or maybe to get back into building after a long kind of trip away from it? Do you have any advice for those folks to get back into building some cool airplanes?
Absolutely. And the number one thing that I always offer as advice to a first-time builder is start simple. If you try and overcomplicate your first build, it's going to be like trying to fly a P-51 on your first flight. It's just not going to work. Building is a learned skill, and it's something that takes many, many years to perfect. And naturally, to say I've perfected modeling and I've gone as far as I can, not true. It's a learning experience that never stops. And if you stop learning, it's going to get boring, and you're not going to want to pursue it. But going back to the advice of start out simple, what I generally tell a first-time builder that asks me is to start out with a simple kit like a Gillows or a Dumas free flight kit, because the goal is to get the airplane built. It's not to learn too many things at one time. And if you can start out simple, and again, one of the major things that runs into a first-time builder is plans reading. It's difficult to read a blueprint if you don't know the language. So to start simple with good instructions and frame up the model, you don't necessarily even have to cover it. Just frame it up so you kind of understand how the process works.
I think that's great advice. Start simple advice, I think, is something a lot of us probably need to hear from time to time, because I know I was told this when I first started flying, was that, you need to start with a trainer, because of course, like everybody, I was like, oh, I want to go fly a Mustang, I want to go fly some of these warbirds, because that's the cool stuff I like to watch and look at. It's like, no, you got to start simple. Start with a trainer. Start with something that's, on paper might feel like, well, this is boring, but at the end of the day, you're going to get much more out of it and set you up for better success. And I think building is a lot the same way. I'll give you myself as another example. I've been really itching to build a balsa airplane over the last couple of months. I haven't started yet because I'm still trying to figure out what that airplane's going to be, but I keep going back and forth. I'm like, well, I want to, build like maybe a little bit bigger size, something like 120 size or something like that. But when it comes down to it, it's like, no, you got to start simple. And I think that advice is something that I'm going to take to heart, because start simple, set yourself up for better success, and then take those skills and continue them on to the next project.
Well, yes. And one thing that you need to know is that success is the greatest motivator there is. And failure will run you off faster than anything else you can do.
I think that goes in just about every hobby you can possibly come up with. I think that advice is spot on. Very, very well said. So, you talk, you like the scale stuff right now. I relate to you pretty well on that. I'm a big scale aircraft fan. You got some really cool scale aircraft behind you on the ceiling. Is there anything cool up there you want to tell the folks at home about?
Oh gosh, there's so many I wouldn't know where to start. I don't know what to say to that. There's so many cool projects up here.
I'll tell you, there's one I want to point out. We talked a little bit about it before the show, but you've got a Ford Trimotor back there in the background that you don't see. I don't see a whole lot of those running around very often.
Well, no, and it was one of those airplanes that, like so many, that I had wanted to do from the start. And doing multi-engine stuff is a whole different ballgame. But that particular design, I thought, this would be a cool airplane to do. So I'm just going to sit down and lay it out and see what happens. And it turns out it's a great little flyer. It's set up with 3 E-Flight 250 motors. And the power is just right. It's relatively light. It's relatively easy to fly. And it's just a great airplane.
Absolutely is, and it looks like a gorgeous model that you got there as well. Hey guys, I've got some breaking news for everybody. We actually have our host Jay Smith. He is finally back with us, and I'm going to bring him into the show right now. Hello, Jay. Thanks for joining us back here on the show.
Hey, hi Pat. Hi Matt.
Hi Jay. How you doing?
Oh, it's been a challenging day. Hopefully we don't have any issues. Hopefully I'm not stuttering, or it's not. I've been having internet issues for a few days and had the local service provider out. Long story, but hopefully it's good enough to get me through the show. And
yeah, you're coming through loud and clear, and everything sounds pretty good.
Okay.
On that note, I'm going to kind of bow out and go behind the scenes and let Jay take over. Jay, thanks for letting me kind of take over your show for a little bit.
Well, thank you for stepping in, Matt.
Absolutely. You guys enjoy the rest of the show, and I'll see you guys on the next episode of AMA Air. I'll see you guys later.
See you, Matt.
Well, I unfortunately didn't get to watch the beginning of the show to hear what you talked about, but I caught the last little bit talking about building. And one of the things that I don't know if you touched on, Pat, but I wanted to talk to you a little bit about your latest project that no one knows about unless you and Matt talked about it, and that's A10. So we're going to have the A10 in the upcoming issue, not the current issue that people are receiving now, but the issue after that. So tell us a little bit about that project and how that came about.
Well, it had several guys had asked if I was going to do a Beech 18, and Acme Products had already done one. And so I thought, I'm not going to step on that guy's toes. So then I found something dealing with the AT-10 and did a little research on it. And it was really kind of a neat looking airplane, and it's close enough to a Beech 18 that it still will tickle the guys that want to do that sort of thing. So I went ahead and drew it up and got it out, got it flying, and it turns out it was just a fabulous flying airplane. So it just, it's one of those deals that I've been wanting to do for a while and finally got around to it.
Well, it's a really fun-looking airplane, and obviously I've seen the photos and the plans and read the article because we're working on that issue now. So it's kind of a sneak for people watching the show that we'll have that available soon. And you've also been dabbling in free flight a bit more, and you've given us a few free flight construction articles, and you even alluded to that there probably is more coming. So tell us a little bit about that. What's gotten you excited about free flight again and designing free flight models?
Well, after spending many, many years in RC, and of course I cut my teeth on free flight, so that's not anything new to me, but it's coming back. And I got to spend a whole lot more time in the shop than I usually care to. Not that I mind being in the shop, but having the pandemic come along and being locked in so much, I kind of got bit by the free flight bug again, and I thought I'd give it a try and see what happened. So I started laying out a couple of new designs that I thought might be okay. So it turns out that they actually flew pretty well. And so it's one of those things that it kind of came back to me, and I've just been pursuing it ever since. And one thing I did want to mention to you, we had talked about the Kettering bug the other day. I actually got it out yesterday and started to do a little bit of trimming before the wind came up, and it looks like it's got some real possibilities. I think it's going to be a good one.
Excellent. That's great to hear.
Yeah, I always like it when something works.
Right. So I don't know if you and Matt touched on it, but you also write the small field flying column. You took that over. I'm trying to remember how long it's been. Has it been about two and a half years? Does that sound about right? Ballpark?
Yeah, that sounds about right. Yeah, Matt did touch on that a little bit, and it's been a great run, and I really enjoy doing the column, mostly because of the really nice people that I meet because of the column who send material in. And
right.
Boy, I tell you, I really appreciate all those people that do send stuff, because there's some beautiful stuff out there.
Yeah, it's really great, all the stuff that people send in and the projects that they share. And then, of course, you share a lot of your projects, but your projects aren't just limited to airplanes. You do some boat designs. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, you've done stuff for Dumas in the past?
Yes. I've been dabbling in boats now for, 20 some years. And that's kind of a sideline thing that back when RC Boat Modeler, was that the name of that magazine? But yeah, the Air Age publication, that I had done several boat designs and construction articles for those guys, as well as a bunch of how-to articles regarding model boats. And it's just another sideline that I've been dealing in for many, many years and really enjoy it.
I raced boats when I was a kid, airplanes. My dad owned a hobby shop, so I do appreciate boats. I've got a Stevens Aero Model airboat that I really enjoy, because you can run it when the grass is wet, or you can run it in the pond out in front of AMA. When I was a kid, I had a Dumas airboat, and so boats are also a lot of fun. And so what's in the boat world, Pat, what's the latest thing you designed?
Oh boy, it's been quite a few years since I did a new boat design, because when RC Boat Modeler went away, that pretty much was the end of of the boat magazine game. So, but one thing I have been involved in just recently is Dumas just released their new Coast Guard fast response cutter. And I had the opportunity to build a second prototype on that and proof the plans and instructions. So that was a real interesting project.
You know, I was just looking at the comments, and I don't want to mispronounce their name, but there are a couple of brothers who do videos, and I watch your videos. So I see you're on. You made a comment at 421 that you started a Miss Scorpio, and I just wanted to mention that I watch your channel, and I enjoy your videos. I find them interesting, and you did a biplane that you got from Hobby King maybe a month and a half ago, and I really liked the biplane, and I really liked your video. So I just saw you in the comments, and I wanted to say thanks for tuning in, and again, enjoy your YouTube channel and watch your videos. So Pat, do you know anything about Reginald Denny? Do you know that name at all?
Yeah, I do. And the Denny plane was probably one of the prettiest old timers there ever was.
Yeah, well, about a year ago, I did a review of a book about Reginald Denny that was written by his granddaughter. And, you know, obviously he had a very long career in movies. He was in a Alfred Hitchcock movie. He was in the, 66 Batman movie. He was in the Batman TV show, just all sorts of films and whatnot. And so there's a cover of the book that I did a review on about a year ago. Really interesting book. It's all about his love of aviation, both full scale, and he was involved with the Hell's Angels movie. I mean, just all the things that he was involved in, and then doing the target drones and working with the military. So it's a very, very interesting book, and I kept in contact with his granddaughter, and it's her hope that it might be turned into a film. And so we've been talking, and she's going to write an article for the magazine. So I did the book review, but she's actually going to write an article for the magazine about Reginald Denny and his connection to aerial target drones, and he had a hobby shop, for those that don't know. And we actually have the sign from his hobby shop in the museum, in the National Model Aviation Museum here in Muncie. We actually have the sign, and we also have his Denny plane and some of the other stuff that he produced. And another interesting thing about it is that Marilyn Monroe worked for him before her name was Marilyn Monroe, and she actually worked on the target drones. And she was discovered when they were doing, I guess, an article and some photography in the the shop where they built the target drones, and that's how she was discovered. So she, before she was Marilyn Monroe, worked for Reginald Denny and made target drones. So very interesting book, and I'm excited to work with her so she can share the story with our readers. Because when I reviewed the book, I got about a dozen emails from people who were familiar with him and his movies and his love of aviation and whatnot. And for me, I was born in 1971, so to me, the first thing I remembered was he was Commodore Schmidt-Lap in the Batman movie from 1966. But then I also watched a lot of Alfred Hitchcock movies, so I've seen that as well. So yeah, I was just curious, Pat, if you were familiar with them, because I'm really excited for us to be able to share the story, beyond the book review I did. I'm excited for us to be able to share the story with the readers.
Yeah, I'd look forward to reading that book. That sounds like it's going to be a good one.
It is. It's really good. Talks all about his career in Hollywood, and all of his involvement with model airplanes. And he was very giving. He would give planes away for free, and in his hobby shop, he would give stuff away to kids. And he was very about getting people into the hobby and sharing the love of the hobby from the book. And it would be really neat if a movie ends up being made, because sharing that history and having a lot of aero modeling tied in, because we have a lot of people. This obviously is a hobby like many others, and we have a lot of people who dabble in it. On this show a few months ago, I interviewed the bass player for Big Brother and the Holding Company, who is Janis Joplin's band. And, he shared the stage with Janis and recorded with Janis, and he played, at venues with The Who and Jimi Hendrix and everybody of that era. He played at the Monterey Pop Festival with Janis Joplin, and and then the bass player for Alice Cooper, and he was also Dio's bass player for those that are familiar with hard rock. He flies model airplanes, and there's just so many people. Years ago, I interviewed Bruce Jenner, and I grew up with him being on my Wheaties box, and I got to interview him about him flying helicopters. And there's just so many interesting people that take part in our hobby, and I think it's interesting that people maybe that start in other parts, like we talked about boats or cars, they maybe they start there and they work in the airplanes, or they go back to it. For example, last month I interviewed my father and talked about my early days in flying, and I was involved with bowling cars, RC cars. I had a sponsorship with bowling, and there was a gentleman on our team who was really good at working on the electric motors and rewinding motors, and his name is Glenn Lewis, and he loves to build from scratch. And I used to fly with him, and we never knew that we knew each other because I was a kid when I raced cars with him. I didn't know he was that Glenn from my childhood. He didn't know I was the person from. And then we went to the Largo Flying Club in Largo, Florida, for an electric event, and we got to talking. And one of us mentioned something about racing cars at the mall parking lot in Tampa. And all of a sudden we realized, that who he was and who I was. And back then they used to refer to me as Little J because my father's name is also J. So to keep it from being confusing. So he just all of a sudden he was like, whoa, you're Little J? But what's interesting is his builds have been in your column, but it was before it was your column. When Paul Bradley did the column, he'd sent in, and as a kid, he had gotten this picture with all these model airplanes, or full-scale airplanes on it. And it's his goal to scratch build every airplane on that picture. So he's done like a Hughes Racer and all kinds of different airplanes. And his goal is to build every one on this piece of art that had all these airplanes. And, that's a pretty neat goal. So, it's just kind of funny, kind of a, small world that you race cars together. And then we met, 15, 20 years later, flying model airplanes, and he's really, really engaged in scratch building. So talking about, getting involved in building, how did that start for you, Pat? Did someone, show you the ropes, teach you? Was it a family member? Was it someone you met at a flying field? What got you A, into flying, and then B, what really got you into building?
Well, my dad actually was influential in getting me started in modeling because when I was a kid, I remember model airplanes on top of the piano. I remember a B-25 and there was a C-47, and Dad was crew chief on B-25s and C-46s. So his aviation career goes way back. And when I was just a little kid, 4 or 5 years old, we were riding around in the back seat of his J3. My brother and I, he'd strap us both in the seat together and he'd fly from the front. And so I have been exposed to aviation from my earliest childhood memories. And then when I got into into building, I built my first model when I was 5 years old. Of course, Dad did a lot of it, but he didn't do it for me. He helped me out when I was in trouble, which was most of the time. But from there, it just kind of went on into Comet kits and Gillo kits, and a little bit later on, of course, I got into scratch building with model airplane plans from magazines and whatnot. But then when I got into high school, I started in drafting classes, and what I would often do is take magazine plans and redraw them up to the size that I wanted to build a model and then scratch build them from there. And of course, it's just gone on and snowballed from that point to where it became a career. And actually in 1996, I did my first kit with Dare, and that was kind of a backhanded way of getting in. It was not that I intended to call Terry Dean at Dare and say, hey, would you do some kits for me? It was that I kind of had this inkling that I thought maybe I'd like to get into the kitting business. So I knew that Dare Distributing was doing laser cut kits. So I contacted Terry and asked him if he'd be interested in cutting parts for me so that I could offer my own kits. And the first thing he said to me was, well, why don't you just let me do the manufacturer? And he said, you do the design. And I said, well, all right, let's give it a try. Well, that was a 30-inch shoestring bracer. And shortly after that, he called me back and he asked me, he said, would you be interested in doing some airplane design for us? And the rest really is history. I mean, it's been an ongoing thing since 1996. We've been working together doing design, and he does the manufacture. And then 5 or 6 years ago, I think it was, Brodak bought Dare, and it's just been an ongoing thing. It's not stopped.
Do you, Pat? Do you have any idea, numbers wise, how many airplanes you've designed?
You know, I was thinking about that because I was afraid that question was going to come up. If I'm probably the worst record keeper there is, but between boats and airplanes, being RC and free flight and U-control, it's got to be over 200 designs over the years.
Wow. Yeah. And when those designs, Pat, I mean, like a percentage, how many of those designs are designs that you said, I'm going to do this or I want to do this, and how many of those are companies coming to you and asking you to design something for them?
Well, it's kind of a little bit of both. When I first started with Dare, Terry had sent me over a couple of requests that he had. One of them being a Luton Miner, another one the Curtis Robin, and there was a third one, but it kind of escapes me as to what it is now. There's been so many of them over the years, it's kind of hard to keep track of the whole thing. But
right
after we got established and got going, he more or less told me, if there's something you want to do, let me know what it is. And that's really kind of how the whole thing's gone down from there. Is if I've got an idea and it's something I want to pursue, I'll ask him, and if he says, yeah, go ahead and do it, it's a done deal.
Nice. And so,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, so where does your, I mean, I'm sure it's different from time to time, but generally, your inspiration come from? Are you looking at books? Are you seeing things on the internet? Is it something you've seen at the flying field? I mean, generally speaking, where does your inspiration come from?
It just, the ideas pop up from time to time. And of course, I've always been a fan of civilian airplanes, and the civilian market's always been pretty limited over the years. I mean, there's probably way too many Cubs on the market, like there is P-51s, but some of the more well-known civilian airplanes that tend to be a little bit obscure in the kit market. And that's always what I've leaned in towards. And, I'll see a picture of an airplane or something, think, that might be kind of fun to do. And next thing you know, I got one flying.
Yeah. Well, I mean, just looking behind you, someone in the chat mentioned they really like the bird dog. You can see that, but you have, quite a few hanging up. And from my understanding, you pretty much keep just about everything that you design and build. Is that right?
Well, I try not to, but sometimes I don't have much of a choice. But no, right. I've sold off a few prototypes over the years, but most of the time, yeah, I keep a lot of these prototypes around. And the majority of what you see on the ceiling up here is all still flyable. So it's, and I don't know if you can see it from here or not, but there's let's see if I can swing that. No, that's the wrong direction. This camera's backwards. Back there, I can't hardly see it. There it is. Right behind us, there's a black and yellow high wing airplane. That's the Farman 400. That was the first actually kit design that I did. And that was for Hobby Lobby International through Aerocraft Models in New York. And the way that whole thing came about was a friend of mine had been approached by the gentleman from Aircraft Models, and he didn't want to do any design work. It wasn't his cup of tea. So he asked me if I'd be interested in looking into it. So I contacted Craig at Aerocraft, and we decided that we would go ahead and give this a try and see what happens. And the idea at the time was that Hobby Lobby wanted a series of half-A Texaco models. Well, I had built a couple of Texacos and kind of had an idea of the kind of ballpark we needed to be in to make these things work. Well, I no more than got started on the project and go out the mailbox, and there's a box out there from Aircraft Models, and it turns out it's a Speed 400 motor and a Mini Olympus gear drive. And about an hour later, I get a call from Craig, and he says, I sent you a motor and a gear drive. You should be getting it any time now. He said, that's what we're going to power this Farman with. And I'm thinking, holy moly, we got a winning combination going here with half-A Texaco. And now he wants me to make this thing electric. And at the time, which was right around 1993 or 4, everybody knew electrics didn't work back then. But we went ahead and pursued it. And it turns out that the model flew exceptionally well. And the one behind you, behind me back here, in spite of the fact it doesn't have any wheels on it, is still flyable and has been since right around 93, 94.
You know, I also saw a Tiger Moth hanging up there.
Yes.
And that's a really fun airplane.
Yeah, that's the prototype for the Dumas kit that I did back right around 97, 98. And if I'm getting my years right, concept of time here when you work for yourself at home, it's kind of hard to keep track of the days and the weeks and the months. But that was one of the early designs that we did with Dumas, and it's like any other Tiger Moth, you can't go wrong. There's another 42-inch Tiger Moth over there that I did for a short kit that's offered through Monsanto Laser Works. And we just finished the 55-inch Tiger Moth with Brodak. And all three of them just fly great. I mean, you can't miss with the Tiger Moth.
My first park flyer was a GWS Tiger Moth. Back around the time that the first issue of Backyard Flyer came out from Air Age. You know, and it had, you know, obviously it was brushed and had either, I think I had a nickel metal hydride in it. And then later, Glenn, the gentleman I was talking about earlier that I was involved in with cars, he actually would take old CD-ROMs. We would get CD-ROMs from computer repair stores that didn't work, and he would rewind the motors, CD-ROM motors, and we put them on our Tiger Moths. At one time, we had 12 people with brushless Tiger Moths that were all CD-ROM motors that he hand wound. And then I went to Ceph and bought my first LiPo battery. It was an Apogee LiPo battery, and that fit in my Tiger Moth. So I went from, you know, brush to brushless, and then from nickel metal hydride to LiPo. And you know, I'm sure you'll agree, Pat, it's just amazing what we can do now. And you, Pat, you keep your airplane so light. It amazes me when I see the wingspans and then I read the weight of your airplanes are so light. But obviously, the brushless power systems and LiPo batteries plays a part in that.
Well, yes, it does. And going back to the Farman 400, the original prototype that's hanging behind me here, that originally flew at about 19.5 ounces with the Speed 400, the 2.3 to 1 gear drive, a 6-cell 500 AR NiCad battery. And later on, and of course, you know, back in the early days back then, we had two choices in motors. It was either Speed 400 direct or Speed 400 geared. Well, within a year or so, we started seeing the 280 motors come online. And in the conversations with Terry at Dare at the time, we talked about doing a whole series of electric airplanes. I mean, they were into the park flyer thing. And he had the guys at Titanic Airlines design and build us a gear drive for the 280 motor, because at the time there was nothing available that would fit it. So they did, and I refitted that airplane with a Titanic 280 gear drive and used a 350, not nickel metal hydride. What's the other one? Oh my gosh, can't remember the name. Pardon me?
NiCad?
No, not an NiCad. I'm sorry. Yeah, a nickel metal hydride. The batteries were about half the weight and half the size for the same capacity. And it took that airplane from 19.5 ounces down to 14.5. And it flew just dramatically better. I mean, it flew good with a little heavier, but it really flew good lighter. So I'm thinking, you know, there's no reason with electrics. I mean, you don't have the vibration or the engine starter, the oil soaking or any of that stuff. So I thought, you know, we can lighten these things up a bit. So I started on a lightning campaign, and each prototype was built just a little bit lighter than the one before it in subsequent designs. And it got to the point where things weren't staying together. And so I know now where the edge of the envelope is. So I'd back up a step or two and beef things back up a little bit. And as we were progressing through this stuff, particularly with the geared speed 400s, we figured out that you can fly a 500 square inch airplane with a speed 400 motor on 7 NiCad cells. Well, if you can do that, by the time we get to brushless motors, I mean, it's just about unlimited what you can do with a 400 class motor, particularly with LiPo batteries now that are so much lighter.
You know, talking about the GWS Tiger Moth, I mentioned this previously on a previous show, but there was a GWS Tiger Moth World Tour where this Tiger Moth went all across the U.S. and I think it might have gone to Canada, and everyone that flew it had to sign the fuselage, and there was a logbook, and it actually came to the middle school that I flew at way back, and I got permission to fly there. It's actually the middle school that I went to as a kid, and got permission from the principal, and we had basically a park pilot club. But this would be long before there was the park pilot program. And we would be about a dozen people would show up, and we'd all fly park flyer electrics. And so the GWS Tiger Moth from the World Tour, one of the people had it and brought it. And I think 3 or maybe 4 of us flew it. And myself, you know, I was one of the people that flew it. And we all signed the fuselage and signed the logbook. And about the time I came to AMA, it also came to AMA. It's in the museum, the National Model Aviation Museum, because it was the first airplane that we know of that did kind of this, you know, all around the United States, and everybody flew it. And then later there was another one of those Wings Across America with Stevens Aero Model, and I got to fly that one too. And it was an unfortunate reason why I flew it. Jim Sherry, our previous executive director, was supposed to fly it, but unfortunately, he passed away. And so I was asked to fly it. And so I flew it at AMA, and then it ended up in the museum too. So it was kind of interesting that both of those are in the museum. So this is a picture of me. I'm the gentleman with the Snoopy shirt holding the airplane, okay? And if you look at the picture, 2 to the left, that's Glenn. That's Glenn Lewis, the gentleman who wound all the brushless motors for us for our Tiger Moths, and who I used to race cars with when I was like 7 years old. You know, he comes out and flies with us, and then the gentleman right next to me on my left, his name's Wayne, and he actually gave me a 50-inch Tiger Moth from Green Models, and I still have that to this day. Unfortunately, he had non-Hodgkin's lymphoma and passed away, and he gave me his big 50-inch Tiger Moth. So you know, I've always kept it, so this is, you know, this is a group of the people that I would fly with in the late 90s, I guess it would be. And so it was really neat, really neat to be part of that tour. And I even donated my shirt. We all got shirts, and I donated my shirt to the museum. But it was really funny, the timing, because it got donated right around the time I started. I came to AMA in 2008. I've been there for 13 years. And interestingly, that was also the same year I went to Toledo, but it wasn't with the AMA. I actually worked in Dave Patrick's booth and talked. I was helping out Steve Chow of Searmark, and they were trying to bring back Dave Patrick models. And so I was in the booth with Dave Patrick helping him at Toledo, and I'd never been to a Toledo. And that was in 2008 in April. And then 2 months later, I interviewed for the job at AMA and got it, and moved from Florida to Muncie, Indiana, 2 months after I went to Toledo. So 2008 was, quite a year. Have you ever been to Toledo, Pat?
I have not. I went to a couple of the trade shows in Chicago. In fact, the year that Dare released the RC kit line, I went with Terry to the Chicago. I'm sorry, no, that was Las Vegas. The year that we launched the RC kit line with Dumas was in Chicago. So I've been to those two shows, but I haven't been to Toledo.
The Chicago show was at iHobby?
Yes, I believe it was. Yeah.
Yeah. I had been to that show before, and that was a fun show to go to. So there was the AMA Expo and Toledo and Ram show and iHobby. So I see Rusty Kennedy says that he flew the Stevens Aero model at NASA Langley in Virginia. So yeah, that was fun to be part of that, and be part of both of them. The difference with the Stevens Aero model one, the Wings Across America, with the Tiger Moth World Tour, we mailed it to each person that flew it. But with the Wings Across America, you had to physically hand deliver it to each pilot. So I had to go meet the pilot before me, and then I had to hand it off to the pilot after me. And that was kind of neat because you got to meet other pilots that were, within driving distance of you. So, it differed a little bit in that regard. But yeah, it was a really neat experience. It's funny that you mentioned iHobby, because I was just thinking about the iHobby show just a few days ago, because the first time I ever went to Chicago, because I lived in Florida, real quick, was in 1991, and I stayed in the Hyatt Regency O'Hare Hotel, which is literally right next door to the convention center where iHobby was held. So then I come back, in like 2008, 2009, and I'm thinking to myself, I'm pretty sure this is where I was. And then I realized it was, and I actually had breakfast with Horizon Hobby in the Hyatt Regency O'Hare, in the same, a restaurant that I was in 1991. I went to myself and three of my friends went all the way to Chicago to go to a Doctor Who convention, and also visit Chicago. None of us had ever been to Chicago, so we spent a week so we could see Chicago. And people that watch this show know I'm a Doctor Who fan. So it was my first time to go to a Doctor Who convention, and I don't want to go too far down that path because we're talking about model airplanes, but it is interesting that I was at the hotel right next to where I ended up later, and ended up in the same restaurant. And interestingly, I entered into a raffle at the convention for charity, and I won lunch with the main actor, Tom Baker, who was the whole reason we went to meet him, who played the Doctor in the series from 74 to 81. He was the Doctor. And I donated money for charity, and I won and got to have lunch with him in the hotel restaurant. So when I went back and had lunch with Horizon in the same restaurant, it was kind of interesting. It was, many, many years later. And so that's been 30 years ago in 1991. And that's a really good segue to say something that I wanted to share with everyone, talking about winning something. So I won lunch with Tom Baker, which was amazing. But everyone that's watching, you have the opportunity to win something right now. And I touched on that before. I did an article about Andy Clancy Designs, the gentleman behind the Lazy Bee, and we're giving away 2 kits, and you can enter to win. And basically, you just have to read the article, and then there's a sidebar with a question. You just email me with the answer to your question, and you're entered in to win. 2 winners will be selected randomly, and when you win, if you win, you'll be allowed to pick whatever kit you want. So it's, want the Speedy Bee or one of the other variants of the Lazy Bee. The 2 different winners will be able to pick, and I've gotten a lot of entries. I know a lot of people are getting back to building. With the pandemic, people have been possibly been home more. It seems like building's always been popular, but from what I'm hearing, talking to companies that sell kits, that they've been very busy this whole year that we've been in, unfortunately, in this pandemic. And so I've gotten a lot of entries, but you have till the end of this month if you want to enter in to win those 2 kits. And the About Us, the article's called About Us, and that's what we call it every time we do it. And then it's specifically about a different company, and this time it's Andy Clancy Design. So please be sure to check out that article And if you want to enter to win, all you have to do is send me an email. That's all that's required, and with the answer and your name and your address and your phone number, and we will randomly select 2 people. So make sure to enter in that. So that was a perfect segue to talk about that. So, do you have any experience, Pat, with any of the Andy Clancy's planes? Have you ever had a Lazy Bee? They're pretty popular.
No, actually, I never have, but I met Andy over in Phoenix many, many years ago. And I'll tell you what, he is quite a guy. I've never met anybody quite like him. And it's interesting, we were, that's back when the World War I Museum was in Phoenix, and Andy was a docent in the museum at the time. And he took myself and a couple of friends of ours over to the museum. And he let us get right up next to the airplanes. And I'll tell you, that World War I stuff is absolutely amazing, what they've done with it in that museum and how beautiful those airplanes really were.
Yeah, I love being able to go to aviation museums, and the Dayton Air Force Museum is only a couple hours from us, and I love going over there. It's just amazing. And they have a World War I event that is just incredible, because they have the full-scale airplanes flying, and then when the full-scale aren't flying, the model airplanes, the World War I model airplanes are flying. And Lee McDuffie, who's involved with a lot of the Dawn Patrol events and the Hoosier Dawn Patrol that happens here at AMA, he usually is the flying boss and is very involved. And so you can go through the museum and you can see all these World War I planes fly, and you can fly models, and it happens every other year. It's called the Dawn Patrol Rendezvous. And one year I was there, I got to fly a gentleman's airplane. It was a Fokker D7 done up like Ernst Udet's, with like the candy striped top wing. And I believe it was a 3rd scale, and he let me fly it. His name's Billy. And that was a really neat experience to get to fly at that event, because normally I would go to cover it, so I didn't bring any airplanes. I would just take photos and interview people. And I was up on the flight line. He says, "Here, I want you to fly this," and he kind of gently starts to give me the radio. And I thought, I can't pass up on this opportunity to fly. He designs beautiful airplanes, Billy Thompson, and he comes to the Nats. He's participated in the Nats, and he does the Dawn Patrol event. So I'm a big fan of World War I. I realized that, if you haven't seen my show before, normally I have airplanes behind me too. I'm usually in my home office, and I've got a Sopwith pup that literally hangs right over my head, and then I've got a Fokker Eindecker that's behind me. But given my internet issues, I wanted to stay really close to my modem and my router, because I've been having some problems. So I'm in my living room right now instead of my home office, or you would see a bunch of airplanes behind me. But I'm a huge World War I fan. I like scale airplanes. I really like biplanes, and it amazes me, that not long after the Wright brothers flew, we were in a war and people were flying these airplanes in combat. It just, I love reading history books and watching the movies about that. And Pat, you have I know you said you like civilian, but do you have a favorite era of airplanes?
Yeah, well, it's funny. That takes me back. You mentioned going over to Dayton. I had the opportunity to go over to Dayton in '02 when we were working on the '03 Wright Flyer, which, boy, that I could go on and on about that airplane and all the trials and tribulations of finally getting it to work. But the one that Dare had offered at the time was the first dedicated electric RC Wright Flyer design that actually worked. So we were invited down to Dayton in '02, where they were going to do the air show in preparation for the '03 centennial at the time. So we went down there and we got to see all of the Wright Flyer reproduction airplanes and actually get up close and personal with them. It was just an incredible thing. But as far as that goes, I don't know that I've got a favorite era other than probably 40s into the early 50s. The Cubs, the Taylorcrafts, the Aeronca Champs, there was just so many beautiful airplanes back in those days that all of them deserved to be modeled in one form or fashion. But, and also you had mentioned too, the people that you meet as you go through your career in modeling, as it were. I had the first article I had published in a magazine was a free flight article back in, I think it was the October 71 issue or 1970 of Model Airplane News. And going through those old magazines in the last couple of years, you leaf through them just to see what was in them. There's pictures of all kinds of people that I've actually known that were pictured in that magazine issue. So, from 71 to what we're at now, it's just absolutely amazing the people that you meet. Not the least of which was Joe Wagner. And I had done what I called a Dakota biplane, which was basically a proposed home build of his Dakota. And it was built with a 8th scale J3 cowl and landing gear. And the rest of the airplane is Dakota in outline. And I met up with Joe at Small in Little Rock, probably 7 or 8, 9 years ago. And Joe signed that airplane for me. So I don't fly it anymore. That's probably my number one keepsake.
I worked with Joe, obviously, on the magazine, and really great guy. And I've said it before in my column that the hobby is amazing, and the people are amazing, and the aircraft are amazing. But to me, it's really about the people. I mean, I've had the opportunity to meet so many great people, and I would say people are always so giving in the hobby of helping one another. Even if it's competition, I've seen it so many times at the Nats. Someone has a problem, and their competitor jumps in to help them because they don't want them to be disqualified because of an engine problem or whatever problem they're having. I mean, just willing to give tips with flying or building or whatnot. And I wanted to mention this, and I think it was in my show last month, and this is a good point to mention this. So I've been really fortunate that some people in our community have been very kind to my great aunt, and you're one of them, Pat. And my great aunt is 97 years old, and for those that don't know, she built the Curtiss Helldiver in Columbus, Ohio during World War II. She was a Curtiss cadet. She was taken to Purdue. They went around to different colleges, and she was in college in North Carolina, and she applied to go to school at Purdue and learn aeronautical engineering. So they brought women from all across the country to Purdue and taught them aeronautical engineering. And then she went to Columbus, Ohio, and worked in the factory and built Helldiver airplanes, Curtiss Helldivers. And she's still living. She's 97 years old. She still lives on her own. Still very, very sharp. And so I found it fascinating because I've always liked airplanes to learn this when I was young. And I've always gone out of my way whenever I find anything Helldiver related, I send it to her. Books, art prints, anything I can find. I bought a reproduction of the pilot's manual because at one point towards the end of the war, she was actually writing revisions to the pilot's manual when they changed things. And so anything I can find. And I just want to take a moment to thank you, Pat, and some other people that have been very generous, very kind. We have a member who's an artist, and he did a book on aviation, and one of the airplanes he did was the Helldiver, and he sent an art print to my aunt, a Curtiss Helldiver art print that's literally hanging in her dining room. And the last time I saw her was for her 95th birthday. I went, and she lives in Maryland, and I went and took her to dinner and spent a few days with her. And we have another member whose father served on an aircraft carrier that had Helldivers on that aircraft carrier back in World War II. And somehow he got a piece of the wood from the deck. I guess, I don't know if they were repairing the deck or how, but he got a decent sized piece of the wood from the carrier deck. And he sent a piece of it to me. And he also sent a piece of it to my aunt. So she actually has a piece of the carrier deck that Helldivers flew from. And then you, Pat, I asked you to design a Helldiver airplane because my aunt kept saying, well, you need to have a Helldiver in the magazine. Is someone, does a company have a Helldiver, or, is someone going to build one? So I asked you about building a Helldiver for the magazine as a construction article, which you did, which was amazing. And I appreciate that. But you went one step further and you built a plastic model kit for my aunt, and she has that as well. So I just want to thank you for that, and I want to thank all the other people. There's a book about the Curtiss cadets. I reviewed it in the magazine a few years ago. It was written by the daughter of one of the cadets, and that cadet, the mother, the daughter wrote the book, and the mother actually lived in the same house with my great aunt, so she knew her quite well. And she said that she wanted to write the book after she saw a book that I had given my aunt about the Helldiver. And so she researched it and actually wrote a book called Flying Into Tomorrow. And when I went to the Dayton Air Force Museum, it was for sale in the bookstore. And we went on a trip, an AMA trip, everyone in publications. So I had to show everyone in my department, look at this book, and here's my picture. Because my picture was in the book. And I was so excited to show people that, hey, look at this book being sold here at the museum, and my picture's in it. And the way my picture was in it is she came to Purdue to do some research. Jean V is her name, who wrote the book, and she came to Purdue to do some research, and then she decided she would also do a presentation at Purdue. So I drove over because it's only 2.5 hours from me, and I actually was involved with the presentation that she gave, and gave some information that I had. I took along some plans for one of the, in a plan service. We had a really nice plan on a Helldiver. I took that along and showed people at this talk that we gave, and they took a picture of us together, and that ended up in the book. So, and on the cover of the book is a picture of a Helldiver in the plant, and there's people that work in the plant standing in front of it, and some of them are laying on the wing, and my aunt is actually on the photo on the cover, laying on the wing of the Helldiver. So anyway, it's kind of a long story, but I wanted to just share that for those that didn't know that, my aunt's involvement with aviation in World War II. And the last comment I'll make about that that's interesting is they all lost their jobs over the radio. They made an announcement that the war was over and that they didn't need them to build any more aircraft, and they all lost their jobs over the radio. It's kind of interesting to think about that now, that's how it happened. But anyway, I want to thank you for building the Helldiver for the magazine, and building the Helldiver for my aunt, and also the members who provided some of the deck wood to her, and an art print. I mean, like I said, our community is just amazing. And just 2 weeks ago, out of the blue, I got a World War I book sent to me from a member, and he said, I saw the World War I airplanes that you had when I watched Model Aviation Live, and I had 2 copies of this book, and I think you'd really like it. And so he sent me the book to read, because he realized that I liked World War I, and that's the kind of community we have. And I really appreciate, Pat, all you did, but I also appreciate what you do for the magazine. You design really cool airplanes, and you offer them to us, and we can share them with our readers. And every airplane that we do construction articles on, we give free digital download of the plans. So if people want to download the plans and print them themselves, whether it's tiled or they want to go to like a Kinko's or something like that, we give every single construction article away for free. And when I took over as editor, it wasn't that way. And nothing against previous editors, but I want to promote building. And then I started the October build issue after I took over as editor, so we had one issue focused on building, and I think that's been 10 years now running. And in that issue, we don't have any kits, we don't have any parts. We one issue, and you've contributed to that issue, Pat, and you are going to contribute. We've already talked about you contributing to the next one. So, thank you so much for all that you do for the magazine and the column, and all that you do for hobby. Just being so reasonable to help people with building and sharing your knowledge, because really that's what it's all about.
I agree. There's nothing. This hobby's not going to advance if we don't share it, and if we can't do that, we're kind of missing the whole point. But you had mentioned too, again, going back to some of the people you meet. I don't know if you know the name John Cole. He was a Top Gun competitor, or was a few years ago. I don't know. I don't follow Top Gun too closely anymore. But, I've heard over the years sometimes from different people, and mostly from those who don't know what they're talking about, the Top Gun guys tend to be a little bit snooty and that they're hard to get along with. And nothing could be further from the truth. And one of the things that brings that to mind is that I was over in Phoenix at a scale fly-in many, many years ago, back before I started even in electrics. It's been that far back. But I was flying a 68-inch Newport that I had designed and built. And a guy walked up to me and he made a comment on the Newport, and I didn't know who he was. And so, I thanked him for the comments and whatnot. And he said, I'm going to go get my airplane out and put it together. So I kind of watched him walk away. And I noticed that he was putting together a huge, great big World War I biplane. So I walked over to him and I said, I didn't catch your name when we talked a minute ago. And he says, oh, I'm John Cole. And I'm thinking, holy mackerel, I know who this guy is. And, so he put this airplane together, and it was just an absolutely spectacular piece of work. And he was going to compete in the scale qualifiers with it. And so I told him, look, go ahead and put the airplane together. I'm not going to bother you. I don't want to, you don't want to forget something. So I walked away. Well, about 20 minutes later, he walked up and he said, hey, do you want to fly this airplane? And I said, you want me to fly your airplane? And he said, yeah. He said, come on over. And so we went over and he fired it up. And I said, you go ahead and put it in the air, because I don't want to be the first guy to skin up the wingtips on it. And so he put it in the air and he handed it off to me. And ironically, this big, beautiful airplane, he hands me an old Fataba Attack 4 radio. And I'm thinking, gosh, what is he thinking putting that radio in that airplane? But we flew it and just had a ball with it. And these are the kind of people that you run into. And one other thing that comes to mind too is back in the late 80s, early 90s, I was still pretty heavily involved in the IPMS and plastic modeling. And I was scratch building 32nd scale plastic models at the time. And I always wanted to do an Aranca Champ. So I met up with a guy down in at the Belen airport, about 40 miles south of here. And he had an L-16 that he had built from parts. And the reason it was an L-16 is because that was the data plate that he had. So he used that data plate and registered the airplane as an L-16. But it was actually an Aranca 7AC that was built from all kinds of different parts. He had a wood wing on one side and a metal wing on the other, and it was a conglomeration of pieces. But he found out I was working on that model, and because of that, I ended up with about 3.5 hours of airtime in that L-16 with him doing dual. So it's just fascinating the things that you run into in the hobby and how interested other people can be with the hobby as you pass through it.
Yeah, I'll share a real quick story like that. So I grew up in Florida, and we would have a yearly air show. I went every year to it at Albert Whitted Airfield in St. Petersburg, Florida. And I would take photos because I've always been interested in photography, and I would take photos of the air show performers, like Patty Wagstaff and, all these air show performers. And I would send them the pictures, hey, I took these pictures at the event, in Florida. If you want to use them on your website, feel free. And several of the air show performers used my photos. And one of the gentlemen who used my photos, for example, was the gentleman he was actually the Top Gun when the movie Top Gun was being made. He that year was the Top Gun, and he ended up flying a Chipmunk, just like Art Scholl. He flew a Chipmunk and did air show performances. So I took pictures of his airplane, and he used those on his website. And another gentleman who I took pictures was John Moore. And John Moore was, at the time, he's retired now, he's done air shows, but at the time he was considered the #1 Stearman pilot. He flew a stock blue and yellow U.S. Army Stearman, and he would fly it lower than just about anyone else at the air show. And he would do 4-point rolls, and it would, cough and sputter as it was running out of fuel. And I was just really amazed. And as I said, I always liked biplanes. So I sent some photos that I took, and he said, I really appreciate you providing me all these photos. And then we got talking a little bit through email and found out he was an AMA member. And this is, before I worked for AMA when I lived in Florida. And as a thank you for giving him all the photos and, kind of being friends, he said, the next time I come to the air show, if you come the day before the air show, he's like, I have to do a couple of flights, practice flights before the show. I'll take you up. So I went out there and met him, and he put me in the front cockpit. He back cockpit, and we took off. And he actually took me through the entire air show routine. He threw his entire air show routine with me in the front cockpit, the 4-point roll, inside loop, outside loop, snap rolls, hammerhead, everything that he did. He took me through the entire air show. And he was hoping to make me sick. He thought it'd be funny if I got sick. So when we landed, they ran up to the airplane to see if I'd gotten sick, and I didn't. I didn't get sick because I like roller coasters and stuff. So I was just so thrilled. I mean, it was the best flight I'd ever had. But I have to tell you, it is a little unnerving when you do a 4-point roll and you're upside down in an open cockpit biplane, and it's over the water in Tampa Bay, and the only thing holding you in is 2 straps and the one over your waist. That's a weird feeling for he'd do about 3 to 4 seconds. Each, on the side and upside down on the other side. So that's a really weird feeling. So anyway, and then from that, I took a bunch of photos of the airplane because I was going to scratch build a steerman, his steerman. And then strangely, I come to work for AMA, and I'm talking to Richard Sang, who owns Maxford USA, and he's telling me that he wants to do another biplane and he can't decide what to do. And I said, Richard, you should do a steerman. And not only should you do a steerman, you should do John Moore steerman, because he's an air shows all over the U.S. and probably all over the world. So I reached out to John and I asked him if he was okay with me giving all these photos to Richard, and Richard producing an ARF of the airplane. And he said, as long as he gives me one, that's fine. So I gave all the pictures to Richard and, helped a little bit. I mean, obviously Richard and his people did the lion's share of the work, but I helped a little bit and gave all the pictures. And so they came out with an ARF of John Moore steerman with John Moore's name on the side. And one of the pictures on their website to this day, if you go to that airplane and you click on the pictures, there's a picture of me sitting in the cockpit on his website. So as a thank you, Richard sent me an airplane and he sent John an airplane, and my airplane, after I flew it, is hanging at the AMA just outside of my office from the ceiling, because I just thought it was so neat to have had involvement in it. I can say to people, I actually flew in that, not the model, obviously, but I actually flew in the real thing. So I don't fly it anymore. Like you mentioned, there's occasional models you might not fly anymore. So it's literally hanging up at AMA headquarters. For anyone that ever comes to AMA headquarters and comes into the publications area, you'll see it there. So that's my kind of interesting experience. And then I ended up coming to AMA and being the editor of the magazine. So then I featured him on the back page, and I am the AMA, and we've been friends ever since. But at this point, he's retired. He was also an airline pilot, but I believe he's retired from that now too. So yeah, it's just such a small world and a lot of amazing people that we meet. Well, we've run over a little bit, but that's partly because I joined late, and I appreciate your understanding. And I tried my best to get everything up and working in time, and I really couldn't just leave and go to the office and try to do the show because I had the technician here. But before we go, obviously, like I said, there's been a lot of interest, Pat, in building, and people are coming back to it. New people are getting involved. So we've touched on this before, but for those that are watching, if there's people that maybe started out with a park flyer or some kind of foam composition airplane and they want to move into building, what insight would you give, or what tips would you give for somebody brand new that really wants to take on their first build project? What advice would you provide?
The one thing that I want to stress more than anything else is start simple. If you start on a project that's too complicated and you can't finish it, there's not going to be any incentive to try a second one. And one of the things that I'd said for a long time when asked is that for your very first build, to get an idea of not only how to read plans, but what tools you need, just the mechanics of cutting out parts and gluing parts together, is start with a simple kit like a Gillows stick frame kit or a Dumas kit. Or Stevens Aero. Those guys also have really simple stuff. And go ahead and just build it. You don't have to fly it. Just frame it up and learn the basic mechanics of the build. And if you want to finish it or finish it later on after you move on to other projects, that's fine too. But don't get in over your head from the start. Because like I had mentioned to Matt, there's no greater motivator than success, and nothing that'll kill the mood faster than failure. So start simple, take your time, and the only time limit that you're going to find is self-induced, and there's no need. Building is a lifetime thing. It's something that you're going to be learning from now on. So take your time and enjoy the ride.
Well, we just got an interesting comment to kind of close things out. It says, I have an original Pat Tritle aircraft. It is an amazing piece of art. I am not worthy.
Yeah, yes, he is.
Well, that's great feedback. When I got flying park flyers, my first laser cut build, I did a Mountain Models airplane. And, it was laser cut kits. It makes it really, really easy. I used to refer to die cut sometimes as die crunch, depending on the kit, so it obviously took a little bit more work, but a fun experience. And so to, have laser cut kits these days, that definitely makes it easier. But just like Matt was saying, don't go hobby thinking you're going to fly a P-51 to start with. Work your way up to that. And just like you said with building, maybe take a simpler project and take your time, because there's a lot to be learned. So I really appreciate all your time. Thank you so much for joining us today, Pat. And like I said, thanks for all you do in the magazine. And, we look forward to showing your AT-10 to all the members in another month. They'll get to see that one and free plans, free downloadable plans. And obviously in the October issue, you're going to also participate in that. And I'm really excited to share a lot of build knowledge in that issue. And I've even asked people to reach out if there's anything that you want to see in the October issue. If there's anything that readers want to see, please feel free to reach out, and we'll try our best to share that knowledge. So thank you for spending part of your day with us, and I apologize for joining late, but it sounds like Matt had things well in hand. He does a great job with AMA Air, so I asked him to fill in if need be. So I appreciate your understanding, appreciate your time, and appreciate everything that you do, Pat.
Well, thank you for having me on. I thoroughly enjoyed it, and I am always happy to do anything that you need that I can do for you. And anything we can do to promote modeling, I'm on board.
And Paul Bradley, he just commented, I know Matt put it on the screen, but in case you didn't see it, Paul Bradley is on. And so we mentioned him earlier. And Paul, it's good to hear from you, and glad you're able to join. Always a pleasure working with you, Paul. So hopefully everybody can join us for the next episode. It is Friday, April 16th. And by then, all my internet problems should be resolved. Fortunately, things went well today. So be sure to join us next Friday. And Pat, I look forward to talking to you soon.
Sounds good. I appreciate it.
All right. Take care.
You betcha. Have a good one.